Alright folks, and welcome to another developer blog. This is developer blog number 18. Now, just before we begin, wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody that's been supporting the channel. I think I've made around 30 plus videos this month, and if you're enjoying the videos and you think the content's been worthwhile, you can support the content goal. Now, yesterday was my best ever day ever on Twitch. 117 subscribers, and we reached the content goal. I couldn't have asked for a better day yesterday, and it's those people that keep supporting, keep watching, keep tuning in. It's you at home that comment, like, all those good things, and it just helps me motivate to put as much time in as I do. I've never made as much content as this in my life, and I've never streamed as much as this. I'm trying my best to stay motivated, and I'm trying my best to keep up with this sort of work ethic, and you are helping me with this massive support. So just before the video began, I just wanted to take a minute out and just say thank you to everybody that's been supporting over these what has been now 8+ months. A quick sort of showcase, if you would like, of the sort of videos that I've been making. Tour of Duty guide over here, What's Up versus changes, master barracks escapes, so I'm trying to master the escapes, balance talks, showcases, state of the game, developer blogs, tune-in changes. Yesterday did really well on that video. 2,000 views on the latest tune-in changes, and the reason I'm doing this sort of introduction is because I'm doing this developer blog slightly differently. Yeah, I'd normally watch the dev blog and leave a comment after each section, but honestly, I feel like I've done all of the commentary I want to do in terms of balance in the last video. And the main issue for me is just the screen difference. I want to see on my screen what the other person sees. That's really it. I have tons and tons of clips of where I shoot someone, they've not even landed in cover. On their screen, they've already hit the cover and aimed, and then on the spectate, they've aimed as they've hit the cover simultaneously, which isn't even possible, but it shows it. And then obviously the server displays something different. Sometimes you get on a really good connection, and it's no different ping-wise. Ping-wise, it feels exactly the same, but everything you see seems to happen for you. It feels like, if I was to describe it, it's almost like you a host. Obviously, there's no host in this game, but that's what it feels like. It's like, oh, I saw him slid to that block and I shot him. So that's my biggest issue, is consistency. I don't truly care about the balance of the game within reason. I feel like the damage is too easy to produce with a Lancer, especially a team firing. You can't really clutch. But I'm going to not even mention that. What I'm going to say is, instead, I think spotting should be looked at. Those are my two little things. I think spotting, when you spot somebody, it should just leave a marker, sort of like Apex Legends, on the floor, last known location. I think when you're tracked, it just becomes impossible to make plays and pushes because you're literally on a wall hack, everyone can see where you are. Or we should look at it a different way, and just like in Gridiron, when you're the leader and you're spotted, you should know when you're spotted. There are times where I've thrown smoke, I've waited and thought, okay, they definitely won't see me coming, only to be beamed down perfectly, and then I think to myself, I must be spotted. So if I could know as a player when I am spotted, I think that would be a really good change, because then they've still got all the vision. I just have a bit more information about should I be making the play. And again, I think that would be a simple change to let the user know when they're spotted, and that could help a ton. So now I'm going to chop up the developer blog into little sections and showcase you the best bits. If you're interested in some timestamps, I am actually in the developer blog. That's right, I'm in the developer blog. And I even did a little bit of joke commentary at 27:14, 29:32, 34:58 and 36:03. So I was in the game playing. I had 180 ping, so I couldn't really perform, so I just thought I'd do a few executions and do a bit of memeing in chat. Let me know down below what you think of the new patch and the developer blog. Was it good? Was it bad? Also, just before we begin and I hit play and I chop up all the sections, obviously a huge thank you to the developers taking their time out to actually produce this. Again, it's been a week of a quote bad patch. It's already been fixed. They're at home in quarantine and they're still taking their time out to do developer blogs and do feedback. I don't know any other team. Maybe I'm just not into other scenes as much, but I don't know any other team that does as many weekly developer streams where you truly get an insight into the game development and their theory. So for me, it's fantastic and I hope you appreciate it. And please, if you see them online, just be kind to them. They're trying their absolute best. Thanks.
A lot, but you've been at the studio for a while.
Yeah,
How long have you been at the Coalition for?
Yeah, 5.5 years, just about a little under 5.5 years. So it's been a while, and yeah, it's been on Gears from day one.
How'd you get to the Coalition? Give us like the 45 seconds of all of the. Just give us the list of the amazing games you've worked on, basically.
Well, yeah, a little bit of a world tour. Been doing this for about 25 years, which seems forever. So started with Team Fortress way back in the Quake days. Small startup in Australia. Worked there. We got bought out by Valve. Worked at Valve. Did Half-Life, Team Fortress Classic, a lot of the early Team Fortress 2 stuff. Worked on Counter-Strike there. The early beta stuff helped define what Counter-Strike was, and did the first few major releases. Went to Rockstar from there, and did a bunch of stuff at Rockstar. And then moved around a little bit more, ended up to Ubisoft, and was in the UK for a while, and then came back at Relic for a number of years, and then from Relic, went to Ubisoft, and then came to the Coalition, basically.
Team, obviously, Jotei's looking at the design from a game design level. You are ostensibly the main person from a PvP. Yes. Weapon tuning, movement, all of those aspects really fall under your area.
Yeah, basically any time a player has a control in their hand, and anything they can do or is done against them is effectively under my purview.
Okay. Well, I don't know. That's either going to make a lot of friends for you or a lot of enemies. I'm not sure. The thing that I'd like to talk about is, I know you've got some interesting ideas around the role of the active reload. So especially, the way that we've got the active inside of the Gnasher right now, how initially it was the half pellets, and we've changed that a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're thinking for the active?
Well, yeah, I'd like to sort of posit this to the community, like directly. Thinking generally about a world where the loadout weapons, and by loadout weapons I specifically mean the Lancer, the Gnasher, and the Snub, the weapons everyone gets on every life they spawn with in your basic PvP modes, that they all would function just like the Gnasher functions currently, which means there is an active reload, but the active reload is specifically just about getting a faster reload. It doesn't give you any bonus on top of that. It just means you get to reload faster than the guy who doesn't do this. And that means that the Lancer would have a single damage curve, the Gnasher has its single damage curve, and the Snub would have its single damage curve. And we leave the actual weapons that have big benefits for getting those active reloads, the more powerful secondary or power weapons that are in the world, and as pickups that are limited, where skill becomes much more of a skill expression particularly becomes much more important with those weapons, because you have to utilize them specifically in a certain way to get the most out of them, and including landing an active reload. That's generally what I'm kind of thinking. It's the reason why mainly is, again, it's all about that consistency stuff. If I'm facing somebody with a Lancer, I can't tell if it's active or not until they're shooting.
Right.
Even then, it's hard to see in the sort of cacophony of general play. And in this case, if knowing that I'm up against a rule set, this Lancer is going to do this much damage to me, at best case, it will always do this. Worst case, it will do a lot less. But at best case, I can parse that much better as a player and use that to make more informed decisions about movement, about what weapons to use, about what I'm communicating to my teammates to flank somebody or to go grab a point. All that stuff becomes much more clear and much simpler, more importantly, for in that sort of mind space and play space. And for new users as well, if you know that there's always a benefit to getting an active reload. But there's no hidden information there, because you can see yourself getting a faster reload. You can't see yourself getting a weapon that does more damage or has a faster rate of fire without actually shooting it. So just the whole space becomes a little bit clearer, a little bit more consistent. And I'm just wondering what the community thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, seeing a few people that are like, I see someone was saying that would improve the game. So I think it's an interesting idea. I kind of that to me feels like logical, but again, be curious to see what people are thinking from that perspective because I like the idea of that the Lancer Gnasher snub. I hit my active, I just get to shoot more bullets faster.
Faster,
Like
yeah.
like just my clip is fat. Like I'm not causing more
Yeah,
damage.
really.
I'm not shooting faster. I think it's a neat idea. Like to me, I feel like it feels very like the reward of hitting like you still want to have that satisfying feeling of hitting an active,
Sure.
but you want to make it so that it's something along those lines of, um, but doesn't kind of create a huge damage mitigation or something like that. I mean, somebody here is like, no, I love the Lancer fast fire after an active. Somebody else like no actives is cool. So like obviously this is like it's interesting because I know that there's that sense that people are like uh, there is that history of what is kind of balancing that actives are tradition of what is a classic Gears feel versus sort of a refined version of sort of creating that consistency that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to do that, so what about putting 8 bullets back into the Gnasher or 8 rounds back into the Gnasher?
Yeah, it's definitely on the table. I'll say that
Oh.
very upfront.
I think chat's about to go like bum, 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 explode.
I mean, at this point, because you're not getting any kind of bonus from that active with the Gnasher right now in the game at all. You're just getting a faster rate of faster reload speed. Adding those extra 2 rounds into it won't necessarily break the overall longer term sort of engagement times that it has. It won't break what's there. It won't make it worse. And arguably, certainly from certain people's perspectives, they'll say it makes it better. But ultimately, it's about making the weapon again more consistent and making it more. And since we're evoking the classic feel a lot. We want to make sure that there is that sort of we're still in the pulse of what the core of Gears is and was and hopefully always will be to a certain degree. And the extra 2 rounds, I mean, that's if you think about it in design terms, that's 2 extra seconds because you're firing 1 shot a second.
Yeah.
So you're firing for right now. Currently, you can fire all 6 shots in 5 seconds. So that means you're adding an extra 2 seconds on top of that. So you could fire. You could fire in a sustained engagement for 7 seconds, and that means you have to miss a whole lot of times and hopefully not die. But chances are, because everything is so short-lived with the Gnasher, the reality of going through all of your rounds on a 1-on-1 or even on a 2v2 Gnasher scenario, going through all 8 is rare without a natural pause where you'd reload anyways. So the end of the day, and I've been looking at the data about this specifically, there isn't necessarily too many downsides to giving it a shot, to bringing it back. Like I said, we've removed the partial reloads and stuff like that, and there's no damage bonus on any of this sort of stuff right now. So it isn't going to necessarily overtly break things by putting it back to 8. So still not fully decided, but it is on the table. There was always going to be this next step. This next step was going to be reconciling the higher accuracy we added with the generally lower accuracy that was there before, and that middle ground, what we released yesterday, is basically it. So that's the next step. There still is future steps we're going to be doing, and we can talk about that stuff a little bit later. But ultimately, it is to bring that weapon more in line with what classic Gears and what longtime Gears fans know and love, but still maintain the newer systems that we added, like the recoil stuff on top of it, which is still there, still present, and still part of the consideration from a moment-to-moment playstyle. But it is less so. It is the baseline weapon. Lancer is always the baseline. It was always the one you can pick up. Anyone can use. Anyone can shoot it down range and get hits. It's a little bit more skillful to consistently get those hits at further ranges now, which was the intention with the recoil system before. But now we've really just made it very clear to the player that this is what this weapon is. It is a really strong mid-range weapon. You can push it to longer ranges with a little bit more application of skill. But ultimately, it's not supposed to take over any of those pickup weapons, which have a deeper skill curve. It is really just a simple pick up, spray and pray kind of weapon.
Right.
Listening to all the feedback, the Lancer does what it does, and we shouldn't really be trying to make it do more than what it was originally designed to do. So that's sort of it's come back around to it, but it also gives that room for those other pickup weapons to have their heyday and really focus on the benefits and the skill curves of those. Works is that effectively we have a spread of pellets of 12 pellets in this case, 10 in historical gears, and whenever it hits, whatever the pellet that is the furthest away was the one that set the range for all the other hits, effectively. But because you could miss some pellets, and because you could hit somebody in the hand versus if they're pointing at you, or because you're hitting them in the torso, or when they're in a different position, basically the furthest pellet away was always at an inconsistent range, effectively. So if two people were literally standing within jib range from each other and facing each other, the issue was that even with their breathing, their breath cycle that they were doing, sometimes on a few frames, that one guy would no longer be in jib range, and then the next frame he would be, because of the movement between the two characters, relative between the two characters, and more specifically where the pellets are hitting on the body. So add to that evading, add to that being in cover, being out of cover, and all these different body positions effectively that the players can get into just in the natural course of the game, meant that where you hit changed dramatically, up to almost a meter in the worst case scenarios. And this is the way it's always been in Gears. This is something we inherited and we identified, and we never. It was a relatively large change to do, to get right, and how to actually do it. So that was the real crux of the issue, is just to fix that and make it so no matter where you hit, or no matter what body position they were in, the relative position from shooter to victim stayed as consistent and concise as possible. Two people are in combat with Gnashers. This is just for the Gnasher, and if the momentum of the time of shot. So if I'm moving full and I shoot on that exact frame of the shot, the server is going, oh look, how if in 2 frames you will be this much further forward based on your momentum at that time, and then it checks the same thing on the victim. So if the victim is moving towards you, 2 frames, then they'll be at this point. So therefore, it will check those 2 positions against the jib range of the weapon, and if the victim or the shooter cross that line during what would have been those 2 frames, then it rewards the kill. You would get the jib. The whole purpose of this is to minimize the amount of times where you shoot somebody just at a jib range. They look like they eat the shot, even though they take 550 damage and almost kill them. But then they just take that extra half step, and then they shoot you and kill you. The idea between this prediction has always been to minimize that. But unfortunately, with the changes that we did, it uncovered an issue with the tuning that we've done, which made that field effectively extend that range further than we intended. So we disabled that, and basically what you get now is just a shotgun which actually registers distance the most reliably it ever has in the history of Gears.
Hold on.
Hey, Liam, can you apparently the game chat, we can hear people playing. Can you do some mutes and stuff?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Length of time is aware that the Gnasher is inconsistent and always just throw up their hands. The Gnasher is inconsistent. It's because it actually was, literally was. And at that point, it's always every time you're about to pull the trigger, it's like, is it going to do something? Is it going to do what I want it to do, what I expect it to do? Now, even if that is, you're going to hit 95% of the time and get what your expected result is, that's still not what we want. We want the player to be able to pull the trigger and get the result they expect. And if they don't get the result, then they can in turn understand that it was because they were just far enough away, or because the guy was evading and he just cleared that jib distance, or any of a plethora of other reasons. But it is within the structure that we want as design, within the rule set that players have effectively decided to engage with. And if we don't have that, then we can't make changes, more meaningful changes down the road, because basically the system everything was built upon was flawed. We want to fix that. We want to make sure that those things are not inherent to the core of the overall experience. Cancel a bounce, what happens? Currently, two things happen. Right now, when you cancel a bounce, you're basically resets your health to regen delay. That's been there since Gears 4. And then we also have a reset of aim assist as well. So if you cancel, you have no aim assist, in particular, no magnetism for a quarter of a second, which means that if you bounce, cancel, and you shoot somebody, you better be right on target. Otherwise, the hipfire magnetism is not going to be there for you. So those two things are really, really difficult to parse for most players. There's no feedback for any of that stuff. Arguably, there's some on the health regen, but you're not really paying attention to the fine gradients of the redness on your screen at those moments. So forgive you for that one. But right now, we want to make it so there's a bit better feedback, specifically about when you cancel, what happens. So we're focusing on sort of what we mentioned in the roadmap. We're focusing on what do we do with movement when you cancel a bounce? And the intention here is to not overly punish, but to make it clear that this isn't like, if you do multiple times, you're building up and you're slowing yourself down. And we're doing that by playing with the acceleration, not the movement speed, not the maximum speed a player can move, but how quickly they can get to it. So if you cancel, then the intention is to apply a bit of a acceleration debuff, effectively, where then that quickly falls away. So for like less than half a second, it linearly falls off from its maximum to its minimum. So you wouldn't really feel it too much after one cancel. But if you cancel multiple times and you come out, you will have a discernible slowdown on your character before you match speed. So effectively, you can still, it doesn't affect the actual speed of bouncing itself. It affects when you stop and cancel and you go from that standstill to your maximum movement. You're going to be slower. You're going to be in position for a little bit longer, which means you're a little more vulnerable to those reaction shots from a Gnasher in particular, or your head's a bit better lined up for this with a long shot, or any number of other scenarios where you can take damage. So that's our intention now, is to sort of cap the overall moment-to-moment experience from fast movement and having it to follow a line to maintain your boost speed to close those distances, to when you do decide to bounce, you get the benefit of the bounce because you move and you displace yourself very quickly, and you can get around. But ultimately, there is an actual tangible, recognizable punishment for doing it too much too quickly without actually forcing people to not be able to engage with it or preventing them from engaging with it. That fully decouples or detaches all of the movement-based inputs. So this is your cover usage, this is your Brody run, and this is also your evade. Now, by default, the classic controls have this all on the A button. Every single one of these inputs is off the A button. So there's a forced delay before you actually start sprinting, because the game has to register the fact that you actually want to sprint by holding the button down. But if you release that button within a certain time frame, you're going to evade. If you're near cover, you're going to go into cover, do either of those things. So there's constantly this fight between responsive controls and doing a lot of things on one button. So what we've done with the shooter controls is just, they're all separate buttons. They're all separate inputs. And there's no delay on any of them. So I can sprint, and if you play any other shooter in the current market, click the left stick, you sprint immediately. And if you press B, you're going to evade immediately in the direction that you're going. And anyone who's familiar or uses tournament controls, if you press the left bumper, you will immediately go into cover. And the best thing about this, especially in the light of tournament controls or default controls, if I press to go into cover and I'm just outside of cover range, I won't accidentally evade. That's gone. Doesn't happen anymore. So these things are going to allow you to move more responsibly and have more precision control over your character across the board. And it's the cost of admission really is the fact that it is very different layout from any other typical default control scheme that people have been used to. Buttons can be remapped like anything else, but ultimately it is more in line with what the current sort of industry standard is for shooters in general, be it third person or first person. So people who are used to jumping back and forth between other shooters and into Gears can actually probably make this transition fairly easily. But all that muscle memory you have for movements and Gears is going to be challenged a bit. So it's going to take some time to get used to it. But once you do, the response from the sport is night and day. If, for example, if you're doing an up A maneuver and the animation isn't right, what I see versus what you see in a server environment is different. As in, I see you doing this move and all of a sudden I explode in death. It's not a very good experience. It's good for one person. It's not good for two. So the idea here is to make sure that those movement skills are still there for a reason. It's still can be utilized to the advantage of the shooter, but it isn't to the 100% advantage of the shooter. Like they can't be the ones who do this stuff and guarantee themselves a kill. Otherwise, we remove that skill gap. There's no intention to do any of that stuff. There is actually always been an intention to deepen that stuff as much as we can. A really quick example will be the Gnasher we had before with the partial reloads. Our intention was to make a larger skill ceiling there for people to be able to play with. If I don't get my reload, or if I miss my reload partway through a fight, then the person who got it is going to have the advantage. But when to do it, remembering to do it, all these things play into the overall experience.
I'm seeing people asking a little bit about, well, one of them I want to ask you about, and the other one people are talking to. So let's talk about one, and then we're going to get into the fun one.
Great.
Aim assist. So aim assist is something that people are a little, obviously very sensitive about. Sure. Do you, and I know that if we look at kind of one of the changes that we just made to the Lancer, kind of impacted accuracy, how does that compare with the effectiveness of the Lancer, and how do you see aim assist working? Most people, I think, when they say aim assist are talking about the Lancer, but really, do you want to talk about what does that look like in the entire spectrum of the game right now?
Well, aim assist, I mean, there's sometimes a misconception of let's talk about magnetism first and foremost. I mean, that is one of three things. That is the thing that people cite the most as being kind of like cheating or appealing to sort of the new players and stuff like that. First of all, this game didn't have any aim assist at all. It would be almost impossible for people just to generally pick up and play. Those people who played competitive in Gears 4 or play with aim assist turned off now, it's not turned off. You still have friction, and which helps you sort of stay on targets a little bit easier. You still have magnetism on hip fire for the Gnasher. Otherwise, most people have tried it when it's been inadvertently turned off. It's just not playable. It's not fun.
Yeah, there was a setting, a Gnasher deployment we did a while ago where the magnetism was inadvertently turned off, and every pro who I think we can all agree are probably some of the best players out there were like, the Gnasher feels broken and it feels off, and we put it back on and they were like, oh no, and now it feels the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just there's this reality where most of the time you're playing a shooter, you have feedback, you have a crosshair, you know where you're shooting, but hip fire in this game we explicitly do not have a crosshair. Which means that when you're firing, you may know where you think the center of the screen is, but it's not exactly where the center of the screen is. And you take that feedback away, and all of a sudden you can't hit anything because the Gnasher, because you're really in close quarters, and the Gnasher's sort of the pattern's a cone-based pattern, so it shrinks. It's very very narrow at the muzzle end of the gun and widens at the other end of the impact. But it's really easy to make that whole cone miss people, like by what feels like a foot, but it's like a fraction of an inch. So it's really difficult you can't have no magnetism, you can't have no aim assist, otherwise you have a broken game. Now, as far as aimed magnetism, for taking the Lancer, for example, right now, if we do, maybe I'll make it. I'll make a note of this. But we can do a comparison, a literal comparison with what was in Gears 3, Gears 4, and what is in Gears 5 right now. The Lancer has the least amount of magnetism that it's ever had in any Gears game since Gears 2. It is the distance that it turns off is about 20 meters away, and it doesn't just shut off. It actually scales down from its maximum to its minimum over the course of about 10 meters. So the further you're away, the less magnetism you get. But the other thing to keep in mind is, like, for the accuracy decrease we've done, bullets don't actually literally get like curved in. That's not how magnetism works. There is like the weapon, wherever you're pointing, there is a center point where the accuracy is built around. So the larger that grows, the larger that cone effectively grows, the more randomness of where the bullets actually hit. We're not making each bullet go towards a target. We're just making the center point go towards a target when you're close enough, which means that all of that spread is still completely random.
Right.
So if you're on somebody near the shoulder, where you're close enough to get the center of that point on the edge of their character, because it's not being brought into the center of them, it's being put to the edge of the character, you're still getting massive amount of misses because of the natural bloom that's there. And that's just the way magnetism works across any basic shooter. So it's not helping as much as people really think. It is there simply to make it so if your crosshair, any kind of part of your reticles, sort of on an actual enemy, then generally we're going to let you graze somebody, depending on how accurate you are. It is mainly for controllers. It's off for mouse usage. So that's that. Adhesion is probably the other major part that people are talking about or have been. And adhesion is the one that we've reduced the most over the course of since we launched. It's the one we added to make it so it's easier for people to track moving targets. There's a whole bunch of rules about your stick input versus the relative input of the actual target you have that actually make it so it's not as effective as people believe it is, but it is still there. And we've reduced that to the point where it's really only on when you're within about mid-range on a Lancer, and even then it's only about a 30% increase.
What is considered mid-range? Just like from a reference standpoint.
It's about 1,500, about 15 meters. 1500
so
units.
If we look at the stream right now, what would be a reference point from where Kate is standing to 1,500?
Just actually pull up the stream here. So, all right. So, right now, right about, no, it's actually really hard to say right now. Who you're shooting, the guy with the flag is about 20 meters from you right now. Yeah. So the guy, hard to say. Okay, there you go. That's about 15 meters. The guy to the left.
Okay.
Sam keeps on moving, so it's really hard to say.
You're going to be behind the gameplay though, so
yeah,
it's not really going to work this way.
Okay. I mean, I think, but just to kind of give an indication of where we're at, I think it's just one of those ones. So like, well, I guess maybe the other question I want to ask is, without trying to sound like an asshole, even though it's a natural indication for me or inclination for me, is from your perspective, and this isn't saying the community is wrong, but why do you think there's this perception that aim assist is so powerful? If you're if the data is saying that it is lower than what people think. So do you get what I'm saying? Like, it feels like there's a little bit of tension there. Can you explain that?
I mean, I honestly can't explain what's other than the fact that there's a general misconception of what it actually does, and how large of an actual area of effect it actually has. Now, the worst case sort of scenario is the Gnasher, because it has such a wide pellet spread, and rather than when you move the center position of that pellet spread onto somebody, it moves 12 other things with it that aren't affected by accuracy. So generally, it feels like you're getting these big sweeps of magnetism when you're up close. But again, we've proven that if you don't have that, the game is broken. So it looks strange when you're looking at it, especially when you're looking at it from a debug perspective and seeing actually what's going on. But it actually feels right. Yeah, it is. And it's a very small percentage of sort of control playing players are able to, or have ever experienced a shooter in particular without any kind of aim assist, especially in the last 15, 20 years. And it is, so when you take that away from somebody, and you add to that the fact that it's generally harder for new people to come into a Gears PvP environment and understand what's going on, it becomes a very difficult thing a very sort of difficult pill to swallow as far as, like, you could turn this off, but you literally make it harder for 90% of the population of playing this game to play the game. And couple that with the
and by
fact
harder,
that,
you mean like it goes from playable, enjoyable to beyond being their ability to control, rather than we're just making it more difficult, and therefore they should just get better, right? There's a difference there, isn't there?
there's a difference there, and there's also the relative nature of like other games. You go and you play other shooters, especially other competitive shooters out there, and they have aim assists. You know, they are there. It's finely tuned to the point where it is difficult to sort of see and the heat of the moment, but it is always there. And one of the big differences that we had between Gears 4 and Gears 5 was the fact that shots are visible. There's decals that are visible on the character. So when I'm pointing at somebody and I shoot them, there's that bright spot that appears on them that makes it visible. And previous Gears and a lot of other games just have blood or something coming off the guy, which is it's not very accurate to the position that you hit. We've made it so it's 100% accurate to the position that you hit and visible, which means that what people are seeing, they're assuming is wrong, but actually has always been there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
So,
I think this is one of those ones where I think when we get back in the studio and we have the ability to sit down and do kind of like a Gear in the Machine, and we can put on some of the dev things and we can show some of it a bit easier, it's probably easier for us to explain, and we can show sort of what it was like for Gears 4. I think we can show some of this a little bit more, and this is just us. We can explain it, but we're challenged by the world of social distancing and quarantining and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So why don't we park this a little bit and we can kind of go and we can show off dev tools that can. I think this is, if you see it, it's easier to understand than the other way.
One general rule of thumb from a tuning perspective, that at rest, if you have a weapon out and the reticle is at rest, so you're not moving or you're not shooting, the extremes of the reticle, so if you pull out a snub or a bolt hock, and you have the little wings off to the side of the reticle, on the left and the right of the reticle, if that is on the body, if it is on the edge of the character, like not the center of the actual reticle, but the actual edges of it, and you're within, whatever the range is supposed to be of that weapon. So if you say for the bolt hock, if you're within about 1,500 units, then you will get magnetism to hit that person. It doesn't happen when you're so far off of that person that there's no element of the reticle sort of intersecting with your target. Like, you never get magnetism in that situation. You only ever get it if you're just close enough to actually pull it. And again, it only pulls it into the edge of the character, not to the center. The only weapon that pulls it into the center is the Gnasher, and that has to be done because of all of the pellets around it. So it has to be brought in. Otherwise, the magnetism just means you just miss half your shot. In fact, often when we tested it before, if it went to the edge of the character, you had a worse shot than if you had no magnetism.
Okay.
So we can definitely show it. I think that's
I think that.